another lecture video for Unit 4. We have so far already done Buddhism, Hinduism, and today we're going to talk about the Mongols. So up to this point, you've already done 2 lessons. You watched a whole lot of videos about the life story of Genghis Khan or Temujin, and then you learned a little bit more about everything else that happened to the Mongol Empire. But in this case, we're going to take some actual notes, right? So as you know, this is virtual learning, and it's meant to replace the time that we would take notes in class. So as you watch this video, please have your slides up and be ready to take down some notes. And we're going to talk about the Mongols. So like I said, I already know that you have some background knowledge due to the 2 previous lessons. So we're not going to spend that much time talking about Genghis Khan as much as we are the impact that the Mongol Empire left in the medieval world. And it was a pretty massive one, and it goes beyond just Genghis Khan. So let's get started. Now, just a quick reminder to everybody, you will be taking a quiz on this information, so it is important that you copy this down in your notes. I didn't provide any slides for you, so it might be the case that you're going to have to open up your own Google Slides and start copying this down. Remember, anything that is underlined is because it is a vocabulary term. So obviously, first we're going to start off with who were the Mongols, right? So the Mongols are a nomadic tribe peoples from Central Asia, right? So in the videos that you guys have seen, you probably heard the term steppe, S-T-E-P-P-E, used to describe this area. And it's basically just an area, if you think of Asia in the modern day, right? You know where Russia is, you know where China is. And Mongolia, a modern country that has some ties to the Mongols that we're talking about from 800 years ago, is kind of squeezed in between Russia and China. And this area is just basically plains, right? Pasture area. And in this region, it's basically just populated with a whole bunch of different nomadic tribes. And you should all know what nomadic means. It means that these are people that move from place to place. They don't have cities, they don't have permanent homes or anything like that. So the Mongols are just one of many massive groups of tribes who basically just are people who move from place to place all over the pasture, and they raise their cattle, right? That's usually why nomads move around, because they usually live off of their animals, usually horses and sheep and cattle. And these animals eat grass. And once they've eaten all the grass, then you have to pick up all your stuff and go. And that's basically what the Mongols were, right? Except there were some things that made them unique. And we're going to focus on those things, because ultimately it's going to be the things that is going to lead to them being the perfect group of people to basically conquer the known world, because of the way they already lived their life, right? And one of those things is that they were nomadic, and they carried their homes with them, right? They rode horses. This is what they were. They were horsemen. Your typical Mongol child knew how to ride a horse by the age of 8. And they did everything on their horses. They went hunting on their horses, obviously, but they also moved from place to place on their horses. They would go out for walks on their horses. They would have dinner on their horses. They would do everything except basically sleep on their horses. And it wasn't just that they relied on the horses for so many things, such as transportations, right? But they also ate horse meat predominantly. Like, even though they had perfectly good sheep and all that stuff, they preferred horse meat. They drank horse milk. So these were truly horsemen in every sense of the word, right? They depended entirely on their horses, and they were expert horse riders. At the same case, though, they also built these things called yurts. And yeah, that's a vocabulary word, because it's a very unique type of home that were about the size of a trailer park. If you've ever seen a trailer park, or think maybe your school bus, they were that big, and they felt, and they were kind of like tents that you can build, and they came apart, and you could put them together pretty easily. But then you can also take them down and carry them on your back as you mount your horse and travel. So that's basically the life of a Mongol. You live on your horses, you herd your cattle, you set up shop, you open up your yurt, you sleep for the night, and then you move on to the next place after your cattle have eaten all the grass. So hopefully you got all those notes. And the other thing about the Mongols you need to understand is that they, even though they were all Mongols, they broke themselves up into dozens and dozens of small tribes. So the Mongols existed for generations and generations, basically as small tribes that constantly fought one another for control of the best pastures, right? So if you're a Mongol and you rely entirely on raising your horses and your cattle and your sheep, and this is where you get your food and your clothing and all that, you need to make sure that your animals are well fed, and you want to have the best lands available for them to graze. So it was very common that one Mongol tribe would find the perfect place, but then another Mongol tribe will find that same place, and they're going to both want it. So naturally, what's going to happen? They're going to fight over it. So it was also very common for Mongols to be constantly at war with one another. And the way it usually worked is, if my tribe defeats your tribe, then you got to go and I get to keep the pastures. That's what the battles were always about. It was only about pasture land, right? And if you lost, then, obviously there were going to be casualties. Some people in your tribe would be killed, the warriors, right? The soldiers, whatever you want to call them. But in the end, your tribe would stay intact. You would just have to go fare better somewhere else and look for other pastures. And if you were a fairly weak tribe, then you probably end up with the worst land, right? But if you were a very strong tribe, you would end up with the main parts. Either way, in the end, your cattle are going to eat all of the grass, and you would have to move somewhere else. So when we put all that together, you have a group of people that, number one, are expert horsemen, right? And we've discussed in previous units how being on a horseback is a major advantage in the Middle Ages when it comes to war, right? A person with a bow and arrow or a sword on a horse is always going to beat a knight on foot, right? So these guys are expert horse riders from birth. Then there are also people that are used to traveling, right? You're not going to hear Mongol soldiers complaining about wanting to go back home. They don't have a home. They carry their home on their back, right? Their yurt, right? And they feel very comfortable just riding a horse every single day of their life. So you have expert horsemen who like to travel, who don't have a place to say, oh, I want to go back home. And then let's add to that the fact that they were hunters, and their main way to hunt was with a bow and arrow. So they were also expert archers. And you put all of that together, plus the fact that they're constantly at war with one another, these are people that are comfortable traveling, fighting wars, hunting, and riding on horseback, right? So if you're a Mongol, you never have to train to learn how to shoot a bow and arrow. You never train to learn how to be a horse rider. This is something you do naturally, and you've been doing it for generations. The only thing the Mongols are missing to keep them from being the perfect war machine, basically, is the fact that they were always fighting amongst themselves, and they were always divided into these small little tribes that really couldn't threaten any major power until this guy, Genghis Khan, right? And you already know a whole lot about him. Genghis Khan was born somewhere around the 1180s. We don't really know when he was born. And his original name was Temujin, right? You should know Genghis Khan means great leader, and any leader is called a Khan, right? So there's going to be a whole bunch of different Khans that we talk about in the videos. You heard of An Khan, and we're going to talk about a guy named Kublai Khan. Genghis means the great. So Genghis Khan is the great leader, right? But he was just your regular Joe Schmo. In fact, he was probably even worse than a Joe Schmo. He lived a very difficult life. You saw in the videos, his mother was kidnapped by his father's tribe, and he was raised as a stepson, and his father treated him very poorly, and his stepbrother bullied him. And it kind of tells you a little bit of what Genghis Khan was all about. When he got fed up with his older stepbrother bullying him, what does he do? He kills him. Genghis Khan, I think, they don't know exactly, but he was somewhere between the ages of 9 and 13 years old when he kills his older brother. And if that's not foreshadowing the way this guy is going to live his life, I don't know what is. If something gets in his way, he just eliminates it, right? And he's not afraid to take major risks, because by doing that, with his father dead and his older brother dead, his family got kicked out of the tribe, and they were basically left on their own. So this guy truly did start from the bottom. But what Genghis Khan does is obviously he becomes a great warrior, right? But what he figures out is as he's building his little tribe and he becomes the Khan of his own tribe, instead of always fighting other tribes and then having the losing tribe leave, he decides, wait a second, if I just defeated your tribe, why don't you join my tribe? Now, Mongol warriors are very prideful and they would never join another tribe. So it became kind of like, well, if you don't join my tribe, we're going to kill all of you. And yeah, I'm not going to beat around the bush. The Mongols are known in history for being vicious and ruthless killers, right? And it starts with Genghis Khan's ancestors. It's just part of their culture. So basically, when he defeated a tribe, instead of letting them leave, he would say, look, you guys can join my tribe or we can slaughter all of you. And there was plenty of times where he had to slaughter a lot of people, but over time, people realized, you know what, we're better off joining his tribe. And then his group became bigger and bigger and bigger until eventually, over many years and many battles, and you saw all of that in the videos, eventually he makes almost all of the Mongol tribes join him. And now all of a sudden, this is the one thing that we're missing. Now you have one man who has united all of the Mongols with their expert horsemen and their expertise with archery and all these things under one person. And now you have a massive army. And their lifestyle is, well, we have territory, our animals are fed, now we have to move, right? They're nomadic. They need to move and find better lands. But now, since he owns all of the Central Asian plains, they start saying, hey, well, you know what? There's better lands in China. There's better lands in the Middle East. There's better lands in Europe. And now you have this massive Mongol army that is very much accustomed to riding on horseback, to living in their yurts and battling. Now you have them with no one to fight. They no longer have to fight each other. So they're perfectly tailor-made to start invading other territories. And under Genghis Khan, they're going to form the largest land empire in the history of the world. And we say land because later on, when the Europeans start, sailing and conquering other areas, they're going to have larger sea empires, but land empires, nobody comes close to the Mongols. They owned from Japan and Korea in the east, all the way to Europe in the west, all the way south into southern China, Thailand, Vietnam. It's a massive empire, and it could have gone a lot further, but then unfortunately Genghis Khan does die in the year 1227, and it's a big mystery. There's a lot of different accounts. For my purposes, I'm going to say he died in his sleep. Other people say he fell off a horse. Whatever it might be, we know that he dies then. Now, what happens after this is also pretty interesting. You have such a massive empire, and traditionally for the Mongols, when the Khan dies, he gives all of his land to his children. And Genghis Khan had maybe dozens and dozens of kids, right? So I don't know if you saw that one of every 200 men is related to Genghis Khan. And that's because this dude went and had a lot of kids all over the world. And it's interesting, right? Like our school, for example, has at least 500 boys in it. And if you believe that, well, the statistics is true, right? But that technically means that statistically, at least 2 students in our school are probably related to Genghis Khan because there's 500 boys in our school, right? So that's pretty interesting. And I think it's the number goes even higher if you're of Asian descent. So if you're from any of the countries that are in Asia, then I think it's like 1 in 4 people are related to Genghis Khan. So this guy had a lot of descendants, but basically his empire gets split into 4 Khanates, right? So when you're the ruler of the Mongol Empire, you're referred to as the Khan, right? Genghis Khan. It's kind of like when we talked about the Muslim caliphates, the ruler of the Muslims was known as a caliph. So it's called a caliphate. So for the Mongols, this is a Khanate. It got broken up into 4, right? Probably the richest of them all is the Khanate that controlled China, and that's going to be known as the Yuan dynasty. And we're going to talk a lot more about Chinese dynasties after the Mongols. We're going to talk about China, so we'll get more into that later. And then the other one is called the Chaganate, and that was basically the Central Asian area that was ruled by another Khan. And if you don't know where that is, it's basically all of the stands, right? Afghanistan, Pakistan, Turkmenistan, Uzbekistan, Kazakhstan, all of those stands in Asia. That was the Chaganate. Then there was the Khanate, which were the people that conquered the Muslim empire of the Khwarezmids, something like that, and which is modern day Iran, Iraq, these areas. And then there's the Golden Horde, which is a pretty cool name. And they conquered, they basically controlled what is today Russia, Ukraine, Lithuania, these kind of places, right? So eventually, over time, the Muslims adapted to the regions that I'm sorry, the Mongols adapted to the regions they conquered. Remember, the Mongols allowed religious freedom. So they had their own tribal beliefs that are tied to their land. So once they left their land, it was very common for a Mongol ruler to convert to the religion of the area, right? So the ruler of the Chinese Yuan dynasty converted to the Chinese religion of Buddhism. Now, I'm not saying that Buddhism is from China, but in China, the predominant religion was Buddhism, right? And the ruler of the Khanate, which was the Muslim area, that Khan eventually converted to Islam, and the ruler of the Golden Horde eventually converted to Christianity. So these, over time, became very distinct, different areas. And even though it was all part of the same Mongol Empire, they were very different from one another. And eventually, when they collapsed, they all did kind of separately. And as you might remember from the video, it was 1920 until one of the descendants of Genghis Khan finally lost power in what is today the Russian area, the Soviet Union area, right? But they ruled for a very long time, and there were very different types of Khanates. So you could kind of look at them as little different sections of an empire. But the most important thing is that they were able to kind of control this entire Asian, Middle Eastern, Eastern European area. Now, one of the most important Khans after Genghis Khan is known as Kublai Khan. And Kublai Khan is the very powerful ruler of the Chinese section of the Mongol Empire. And one of the reasons we know so much about him is two reasons, really. Is number one, he built an amazing palace in Shangtu, which is also known as Xanadu, which was written about a lot. And the second reason is because lots and lots of Europeans, which is where we get a lot of our information from, traveled to China. And one of the reasons this was possible was because the Genghis Khan Empire that he left behind conquered the Silk Road. And what that basically means is that it connected the entire world. Before the Mongol Empire, it was very difficult for you to travel from one country to another. You just couldn't do that. Other empires or other countries would just not let you in. And if you did get in, there was a good chance they might kill you. So maybe you just wouldn't do it. But when it was all under the control of the Mongols, they basically created like a passport system or a visa system, which gave you permission to travel all throughout their empire. So it was possible for someone from China to travel through Central Asia into the Middle East and into Europe. And it was possible for someone from Europe to travel all the way to China. So a lot of Europeans eventually went and traveled to China and saw the Yuan dynasty under Kublai Khan and wrote a lot about it because it was amazing. Like when you think of the Dark Ages in Europe, when they went to see the lavish and luxury that Kublai Khan was living in China, it was like they were in another planet. They saw gold and silver and wealth that they had never seen. And so a lot of people wrote about it. Probably the most famous person to write about it is Marco Polo. And in case you thought Marco Polo was just a game, it's actually based on this person. I am going to tell you that we cannot prove that Marco Polo actually existed, but the book that is credited to have been written by Marco Polo definitely did exist. And it basically tells the journey he had living in China under Kublai Khan for 17 years. And he wrote a lot of interesting things, right? Like he mentioned that they had this crazy idea to have paper money. Right? We think paper money is normal, right? Like you have a dollar bill. Well, it's actually made out of linen. But still, back then, Marco Polo thought this was ridiculous. How would you have money made out of paper? Like money has to be gold or silver coins. But something he didn't realize is when you have as much wealth as the Chinese did during this time period, how are you going to carry so much gold coins or so many silver coins in your pockets without it, number one, getting heavy, or number two, people noticing that you're carrying so much of this gold and silver coins that they're going to rob you? So what the Chinese came up with was paper money that represented the gold and silver that you actually had. The Europeans thought this was a crazy idea, but just think about it. The Chinese had so much money that instead of carrying around all of their gold coins, they just decided to make paper money, which is obviously what we do now today. And then another thing that I'll point out is he was also amazed by these pipes that the Chinese had in their buildings, where they would make hot water run through all of the pipes. What do you think that was for? It was a heating system, right? In his palace, Kublai Khan had pipes all over his palace with the running hot water, so that when it got cold, they would turn it on. And if you think about it, when you turn on your heat today, chances are, now there are different ways to heat a home nowadays, but chances are you have a boiler and it works in the exact same way. It is hot water running through the pipes in your house, and that's what heats your apartment. This was 800 years ago, and the Chinese already had this. Most Europeans had never seen stuff like this, so they were all pretty amazed by these kind of things. Marco Polo would eventually go back to Venice, which is where he was from, and wrote down this book. And this is how we have a lot of information about the Khans. Unfortunately for the Mongol Empire, it didn't last too long after the collapse, after the death of Genghis Khan. But the legacy that they leave behind is very interesting, right? People write stories about how ruthless the Mongols were. These are the people that would use catapults to fling dead bodies into cities, to scare them. They would fill moats with dead bodies. They'd set entire cities on fire. They'd killed everyone if they didn't surrender immediately. And, I've started to read some of your responses, right, to the video at the end of yesterday's assignment. Do you think Genghis Khan was a good or a bad ruler? And there's no right answer to that. Now, he did some amazing things. He conquered more than half the world, and he did give freedom of religion. He gave women equal rights, which was unheard of at that time. But you can't ignore the absolute carnage that they left everywhere they went. They destroyed entire cities. That's part of their legacy, but also they united Europe, the Middle East, and China like never before. The Chinese were introduced to Europeans. The Europeans were introduced to the Chinese. The Japanese, which we're going to talk about later on, are going to be very much influenced by all this. And in the end, that's really going to be the legacy of the Mongol Empire. It was massive. It happened in the lifetime of basically 70 or 80 years, and it changed the world. Unfortunately, one of the things that spread was not just religion and communication and wealth. It was also going to be the Black Death. And if you don't know, it was a pandemic that spread from China all the way into Europe and killed hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of people. And it would have never happened if it wasn't for the fact that everybody was now interconnected. So that is another legacy of the Mongols. So hopefully I didn't get too boring there. I tried to make this as quick as possible. You have all of your notes. And just a quick reminder, we will be having a live chat, and we'll have a quiz on all of this probably next week. So if you have any questions or comments, please feel free to email me, and I'll see you guys next time. Later.